Hello everyone again. We are going to talk about examples of normal form games now. Of course, we are going to begin with examples which are extremely important. So the first example is very classical. It's usually called the prisoner's dilemma. And the story is as follows. Two prisoners have been captured by the police and the police has some suspicion that they have together committed a crime. The two prisoners, each of the two prisoners, independently has two options either to confess that they have committed a crime together or not to confess, to deny it. So we are going to write what happens in this story as a matrix. Since we have only two players, it's very convenient. So basically, the rows of the matrix will represent what happens to player 1, the first prisoner, what that player chooses to be exact. So she can confess or not confess. Let's call it deny. And player 2 also has the same two options. This is going to be a symmetric game, so that the strategies are going to be the same and the utilities are going to be symmetric. So only dependent on what the players actually do and not on which player, what is the name of the player who does something. So player 2 also has two options: to confess or to deny. Now, the way we write this down, we are going to write two numbers in each cell. The first number is going to take to represent the utility of the first player if this cell is the outcome. For example, this cell is the outcome when both players confess, and this cell is the outcome when the row player, so player 1, denies and player 2 confesses, and so on. So the first number in each cell is the utility of player 1 and the second number is the utility of player 2. This is called the matrix game. It's just a way to write, to denote games. Of course, if we had n players in general, we would need an n-dimensional matrix. So theoretically, every game, every normal form game can be written as a n matrix, simply that it's only convenient when there are two players. So let us write it. So by the way, if I have three players, sometimes people say, okay, this is the matrix. If some player does that, that is the matrix if some player does that. So we first tell what a certain player does, and then the reduced game is already a two-dimensional thing. So we can even write a three-player game as a matrix. So if both confess, they get to jail, let's say, for 3 years. So then they get -3 utility. If they both deny, on the other hand, the police can only prove a minor offense on their part. So that gives them the utility of -1. So they go to jail for 1 year each. However, the interesting part, if player Y denies while player 2 confesses, then player 2, for cooperating with the interrogation, gets to freedom. So that player gets 0 utility, while player 1 for denying, but now the police can actually prove that the player has committed a crime because of the confession of the other player, that player gets -5. So player 1 gets to jail for 5 years because she didn't confess the crime, which is now proven due to the confession of player 2. And the symmetric case happens if player 1 confesses and player 2 denies. So the confessing player gets 0 and the denying player gets -5. That's a symmetric game. And now what we see here is that this is a very interesting case, because regardless what player 2 does, it's always best for player 1 to confess. Indeed, if player 2 confesses, then player 1 confesses and gets -3, or she denies and gets -5. Definitely it's better to confess. If player 2 denies, then again, player 1 can either get -1 or 0, it's better to get 0. So it's better for player 1 to confess regardless what player 2 does. The symmetry implies that regardless what player 1 does, it's also better for player 2 to confess. So this is the expected, not in the probabilistic sense, but in the colloquial sense. This is the outcome that we expect. Now, what I basically mean is that this is the outcome in dominant strategies, and let me define this. So that is probably the most natural thing to say. So it often doesn't happen that you have an outcome in dominant strategies, but in this case we do. So profile actually well, we can define what a dominant strategy is, but we are going to define. Okay, let us define what a dominant strategy is. So strategy S in the I in the set of strategies of player I is dominant my apologies. So going back, a strategy I is dominant if it's the best, regardless what the others do. Formally, if for each profile of the others S minus I in S minus I, it's the best for player I. So the utility of player I, when that player plays as I and the rest play as minus I, is always at least as good as what that player would get if she played some other Si prime and the rest the same. And this is of course for each Si prime. So once more, strategy is dominant if regardless what the others do, it's always the best to play the strategy. And then the next definition, which follows, a profile is a dominant strategy, is realized in dominant strategies in the language of implementation theory, which talks about what we can have as a, for example, dominant strategy. So a profile S is, well, we can say realized as a dominant strategy. Realized as is maybe too long, but it's a dominant strategy if each player in this profile plays her dominant strategy. If for each I, Si, so the ith coordinate is dominant according to the definition above. Well, it looks ugly, but I cannot write well with that digital pen. So, going back to our example, in this example, the dominant strategy is only to play this thing. Of course, sometimes you don't have a dominant strategy. Sometimes, if you do that, it's better for me to do this. If, let's say, you speak English, it's better for me to speak English. If, however, you speak Spanish, it's better for me to speak Spanish. If I only care about understanding one another. So, often you don't have a dominant strategy, but in this example, you do. So, it's very likely that if players indeed only care about only what we have here in the matrix, then they're going both to confess. And please notice that they're going both to get 3 years in jail instead of -1, which they could have gotten if they both denied. So each caring about what is best for her can be worse for the whole society. That's a very classical game because actually that demonstrates that it's not always good to care for what is best for you. Sometimes it is good. The invisible hand of Adam Smith is an example, so we are not going to formalize it here. But in many cases, it's not, at least it's not optimal. In this case, it's highly suboptimal to care for what you personally want. And the problem is that, of course, even if you know what the other side does, you will still want to confess it's a dominant strategy. So the problem is it's not easy to change this. We need really to change the game, or maybe that's not really what people do. Now, in real life, as we know, people not always think only about their kind of material good or only about their formal interest. And in the experiments which have been run, indeed, people not always play this confession. Well, of course, experiments are not run on prisoners, but experiments which are run on students, and there is a similar story which gives the same game, which gives rise to the same structure. So people not only care about that, or people are not rational. There are many reasons why people not don't play this always, and it's still an open question why people don't always play the prisoner's dilemma as we expect them to. Probably both modeling of the utilities and of how people think is wrong. So it's not like people always do that, but it's an important example. By the way, an important case where people do play very, very egoistically, and that actually hits them back, is the so-called tragedy of commons. Now, for two players, it's exactly the prisoner's dilemma. And what tragedy of commons is about? It's about, let me delete the definition of dominant strategy, and I'll just speak about the tragedy of commons. Uh-huh. So there is many stories which can give rise to the same game from the mathematical point of view, and one of them is the tragedy of commons, which for two players, which is the following. So imagine you have two peasants, and the peasants need to graze each needs to graze his cows. And imagine that you have two options as a peasant. You can let your cow graze without mercy, and just it will of course exhaust and finish the graze plot, the graze patch, or you can just be considerate, so you don't let your cow overgraze, and you eventually preserve the place for the future. So in this case, there are two peasants, and peasant one can either overgraze, so let the cow like eat everything, or be more considerate, and then of course the land and grass, whatever, it has time to recover. Be considerate. And the same is true for peasant 2. It can either overgraze or be considerate. So there is a common resource, that piece of land where they both graze, or it can be the air we all breathe, and the question is whether you're going to produce a lot of production and thereby cause air contamination, or you are going to be considered as a head of some company. So this is a very recurring story in this case of common resource. So that's the tragedy of commons. Tragedy of commons for two players, because while the prisoner's dilemma is given for two players, the tragedy of commons is often given for n players. And in this case, we are going to give it for two players, and then it gives the same game as the prisoner's dilemma. So if you both overgrace, then of course you both suffer, and you don't have anything, you don't have much which you can do. So you both get, let's say, 1. Don't have much utility because the land gets destroyed. Now, if you are both considerate, then you manage to keep your cows healthy, and also you manage to do it sustainably, so it's everything fine, and therefore you both get, let's say, 3. Please pay attention here. You have positive numbers, unlike what we had in the case of prisoners. Now, if you are considerate but the other person overgrazes, then you are screwed, because first of all the land gets destroyed, and you have not even used it once because you have been considerate. So in that case, you get 0, let's say, while the other person gets the best option because the other person has used something. So the other person has used something, but you have been considerate. So you basically kind of helped the place being okay. So the other person gets not 3 as they would get if you both were considerate, but actually 4, because actually the other person didn't care about the place and let the cow run freely all the time. And symmetrically, what happens if you have been overgrazing while the other person have been nice and caring? So you get 4 and the other person gets 0. Please pay attention. We model egoistic people here. I mean, we model people. Egoistic may be not clear what it means, because it can be that you mean just optimizing your utility is egoistic. That's not a clear definition. We model people who only care about how much their cows get in the long run. So you don't care about what is your relationship with the other person and all that. Only how much your cows get. If that is the case, then we have gotten a game which is of the same structure as the prisoner's dilemma. And also here, the only dominant strategy is that both overgraze. Because if, let's say I'm the row player, if the column player overgrazed, it would be better for me to overgraze, because it's better to get 1 instead of 0. If the other person, on the other hand, was considerate, it's also better for me to overgraze, because it's better to get 4 instead of 3. So in any case, it's better for me to overgraze, and the same for the other person. It's symmetric. So they're going to destroy the land if they are rational. As I said, in real life, it is not the case. And usually there is the story of Dunbar number. So when the number of people is not large enough, is less than 150 or something, they can be reasonable, they can be considerate. But when the number gets too large, they are not considerate. Of course, there are many conditions here, and I'm not going to go into that right now, into how people actually behave. And it's an open question in general. But in this example, in our model, that these are their interests and they are rational, we see that it's a very interesting case that the prediction is pessimistic. Okay, so we have learned what is the dominant strategy and these examples of prisoner's dilemma and the tragedy of commons for two players. Now, let us go to the next example, and that's going to be an example of coordination. Let me just take a look. No. Before that, I want to give another example. That's going to be the famous hog-dove game. It's very important in biology, because biologists, especially evolutionary biologists, try to understand why animals are not always aggressive. There is even a chapter like that in the book by Dawkins. So, in the famous The Selfish Gene book, why animals are not always aggressive? And the answer is it's not always the best for them in the long run to be aggressive. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. So this is the kind of games used by people like Maynard Smith to understand biology. And the game is called Hawk Dove. So you have two, let's say, animals, but of course it can be two any animals. It can be true for any. So you have, let's say, two bears. When they meet, they can either fight or be peaceful and share what there is. So each animal has the strategy of being hawkish to fight, or of being like dove. Of course, being like a dove in this case means to be very peaceful. And the same is for the other animal. It can be like a hawk, or it can be like a dove. So when they're both like hawks, then they indeed share eventually the thing. Imagine that, assuming they are the same size. But the fact that they fight means that they have probably endured strong injuries. So, in this model, when they're both like hawks, actually they have a negative utility from their encounter. Despite that they have something, let's say, if I said two bears, so they have some animal they one of them has killed to share. The fact that they have fought and they have injured each other means that they eventually suffer, so they get -1 or -10 even, because injury is very dangerous in the wild. On the other hand, if they were just both doves, so they would do the same, share the thing without fighting, they would be actually enjoying, and they would get, let's say, 5 each, +5. Now the interesting part is when one is dove, that one is dove and the other one is hawk. Here, dove just backs off because the hawk is aggressive, and the hawk gets everything. So the hawk gets, let's say, 8, more than 5, because it does not need to share. I even can write 10 because, let's say, 10. Y is 5. And dove gets 0. It's better than -10 when they fight, but it's less than what the dove would have gotten if there were two doves. And the symmetric case happens if you have the row player hawk and the column player dove. So the hawk gets 10 and the dove gets 0. Please notice here there is no dominant strategy because, let's say, it's a symmetric game. So as a role player, if the other guy is hawk, it's better for me to be dove. I don't want to fight. On the other hand, if the other guy is dove, it's better for me to be hawk because I want to get everything for free. So in this case, there is no dominant strategy. But there is a so-called Nash equilibrium, which is probably the most famous solution concept in the study of strategic form games. Now, solution concept is the definition of what we expect to be. What is the stable state we expect? And Nash equilibrium, invented by John Nash, which you may have met in the film Beautiful Mind, which of course was a nice film, but however they explained wrongly what a Nash equilibrium is. It's a profile such that nobody can improve if the other ones don't change what they do. So I cannot unilaterally improve what I have. Unlike the dominant strategy, which said that what I'm doing is the best regardless what the others do. In the case of a Nash equilibrium, what I'm doing is the best if the others do what they do. So it's not like always the best, it's only the best given this constellation of strategies. So a profile S is a Nash equilibrium if no player, so for each player, what the player gets now is at least as good what the player would have gotten if he had changed the strategy. So if UI, the utility of player I, given her strategy and the strategy of the others, is at least as good as what would happen if the player I played some SI prime while the others kept doing what they do. For each possible deviation SI prime. And in this case, we do have a Nash equilibrium. Actually, we have two Nash equilibrium. So let us discover those. Is Hawk a Nash equilibrium? No, because each one of them, not only one of them, but each one of them in this case, has a deviation which would be profitable, because each one would profit more by being a DAF. So it's not a Nash equilibrium. Is DAF a Nash equilibrium? No, because if the other guy is DAF, it's better for me to become Hawk, to become the Hawk. But DAF Hawk and Hawk DAF symmetrically they are Nash equilibrium. So this is not, but these guys are. Because if I am the DAF and you are the Hawk, I don't like being the DAF, of course, in the couple, but it's better than changing to be the Hawk and getting -10. And of course, if you are the Hawk, you want to be the Hawk, to keep being the Hawk. So these two are Nash equilibria. They are not the same. So the role player prefers, of course, these Nash equilibria when he's the Hawk, and the column player prefers these Nash equilibria when she's the Hawk. But there are two Nash equilibria. So we can say that those two profiles Hawk, we can symbolically write them like Hawk DAF, and the profile DAF Hawk. So the first one is Hawk, the second one is DAF, and the first one is DAF, the second one is Hawk. They both belong to the set of Nash equilibria. And we want to also define the notion of best response, which is a dynamic when each one best response. We are going to define a version which is very convenient to talk about when we talk about Nash equilibria. So best response dynamics, there are many dynamics, but we are going to define the following one. It's the following sequence. The following sequence. At time 0, they both begin at some profile. We may begin at any profile. And then they alternately, each player best response, so finds a best response to what the others do now. In the case of two players, it's just the first, the second, the first, the second. If we had n players, it would be the first, the second, the end, and again the first, the second, and the end. So it's just a round robin. They just go in the order and then they wrap back. So at time 0, we have some s of time 0, so it's some s1 and s2. And then at time, well, let's write the first step. So then at time 1, so s1 would be that the first player plays any best response to what the second player does, and the second player doesn't change. At s2, the second player best response to what the first player did in the previous time step. So the first player plays what was in time 1 in his coordinate, and the second player best response from the point of view of, when I write best response, I should write from the point of view of each player. So the second player best response to S1 1 what the first player did, and so on and so forth. So we can now formally define so S0 is whatever, S1 till Sn, any strategy profile, and then for each time which is greater than 0, the strategies of all the players besides one remain as they were, and the strategy of player 1 is to best respond to what the others did. So then all players j besides in the set of players besides the player, I'm now thinking how to code the player whose turn is to play. T mod n, and is the number of players. So T modulo n, 1 second. First player 1. Maybe modulo n plus 1. N plus 1. Yeah, I don't manage to write this. So the first player plays time 1 is first player second till n, and n at the time n plus 1 you have player 0. Okay. But you understand, I hope, the intuition. So player first player, second player till the nth player, and then back to the first player. So two players is going to be first, second, first, second, first, second. So all the players besides the active player ST is defined to be of player J is defined to be whatever that player did before in the time t minus 1. But the player t modulo n plus 1 just best response. So as t modulo n plus 1. Now it's a best response. There may be several. So it belongs to the set of best responses. Formally, best responding is a set. So when I spoke about best response in the previous example, I wrote BR as if it had been a function, which is not the case. We of course can think of something but to define a function, but it's a best response, one of those who constitute a best response. Or at least it's a function to subset. Because there may be more than one best responses. So that player who acts picks a best response of from his point of view. So from this player to whatever the other players do. So we look at whatever happens in time t minus 1. And we look at what happens with minus again, so whatever the others do. So that player, team modulo n plus 1, the active player, finds a best response to whatever the other players do. And the active player changes is the next player each time. So that is the definition of a best response. And now, please notice a simple observation. That a profile is a Nash equilibrium if and only if for each player the best response to what the others do is whatever the player does. Or at least it's a best response. So let me write it again. A profile S is a Nash equilibrium if and only if for each player I remind you how we wrote it. So for each player, what the player does gives at least as good utility as the player could get with any other strategy. Which basically means it's simply the same. It is the same as saying that Si is a best response to S minus I. So profile is an equilibrium if for each player Si is a best response, belongs to the set of best responses from his point of view to S minus I. It's an equilibrium if and only if each player best responds to what others do. And now let us go to the example which we saw before. It's about Hawk and Dove. So when it's not a Nash equilibrium, at least one player can improve. And that we define that the first player has the chance to improve than the second one. So if they both are Hawks, then the first player has a chance to do something, and for that player it's better to become a Dove. And then they go here, and that's an equilibrium. Here nobody can improve, so here the best response dynamic stops. I mean, formally you can say that the sequence is infinite, but it's going to be constantly on this strategy profile. Now, if, pay attention please, if when they were both Hawks, the second player had the chance to improve, then the second player would have gone to be Dove. So then they would have landed in this Nash equilibrium. So the first one who has a chance to improve actually gets a worse state for herself. That's actually interesting. Now, if they both were Doves, then again, the first player who has a chance to improve gets now a better state for herself. So here, if the role player can improve, of course, if the other guy is the Dove, I want to become the Hawk, so I will go here. So please notice how we define dominant strategy when like it's obviously the best. And then we said, okay, it's not like we often have a dominant strategy when what you're doing is the best, what actually everyone does, is the best for that person regardless of others. But let us define a Nash equilibrium, which says that what you're doing is the best given that others do something else. Do something. And then we also have this idea of best response dynamics, where you, intuitively speaking, look for a Nash equilibrium. So everyone wants to do the best, but they are doing it not simultaneously, but one after the other one, alternately. It's not that they always will achieve a Nash equilibrium, but it's simply interesting to see these dynamics and to see whether we have a Nash equilibrium. Okay, now let us go to the next example. That's going to be a traffic coordination game. So let us model coordinating on the side of the road on which we drive. So again, you have two players. So player 1 chooses whether to ride on the right side of the road or on the left side. Player 1 goes up that direction, up, and the player chooses whether to ride here on his left side or on his right side. L or R. There is another player who goes in the opposite direction towards player 1, and the same choices are faced by that player. Shall that player play L or shall that player play R? Just remember that from that direction, L is going to be that and R is going to be that. So that player has the strategy L and the strategy right too. Now, what happens to the utilities? As long as they choose the same rule, so each one rides on his L or on his R, they're both set. So they both get one, for example. Because when you go in opposite directions, your R is different from my R. Now, if, however, they are not coordinated, so you choose R, I choose L, or the other way around, there's a chance of collision, of course, then, and then they both get, let's say, minus 100. And here, of course, we have two Nash equilibria, L or R. Here, unlike what we had in the case of Hawk and Dove, they're both indifferent, at least from the point of view of this game, which Nash equilibrium will take place, but they want to have a Nash equilibrium. And if there is no Nash equilibrium, then the best response dynamics will bring us to one, in this case. So if the row player plays R and the column player plays L, so the first guy to be able to change will go to coordinate to play as the other player does. So in our assumption, player 1 is the first, so she will go to be also L as the other players, and then they're going to settle in this equilibrium. If they begin here, when the row player plays L and the column player plays R, then the first player will also go to be R, and then they're going to settle in this equilibrium, RR. So here we have pure coordination. It's a question of being coordinated. And there is another example, which is a variation on this coordination game, and it's often called the Battle of Sexes, or in the book of Rubinstein and Osborne, it's called Bach-Stravinsky, when you have two people who need to coordinate, but they also have preference between those options. So in this case, let us say the Battle of Sexes. That is the classical name. So you have a couple, player 1 and player 2, let's say man and woman, and say man likes football and woman likes tennis. They both have the option to go independently, have the options to go to football or to tennis. And the second player, let's say the man and the woman, so the woman has also football and tennis. However, the strategy gives them really different utility. So since they really want to go together, they always enjoy going together more when they enjoy being not together. Now, 1 second. So the classical version of the Battle of Sexes is as follows. The man likes football more, the woman likes tennis more. So if they both go to football, the man enjoys it more. So for example, the man gets 5 and the woman gets 3. But they both enjoy because they are together. The opposite happens if they go to tennis. The woman gets here 5 and the man gets 3. However, if they don't coordinate, so the man is, for example, the man goes for tennis and the woman goes for football or the other way around, then since they're not together, regardless where they go, they just don't enjoy it all. Now, that's a classical Battle of Sexes, and here, of course, we have two Nash equilibria, and if not, if they begin here at the man is for tennis, the woman is for football, then the first player would just change to do what the other person does. So it will be football, football. And if they begin here, the man is for football, the woman is for tennis. The first player went here, would go here, and then they would be on tennis, tennis. So that's the classical battle of sexes. The word battle, of course, is, I think, just a trick to make it sound like something more interesting than it is. Because there is no battle, actually. There is a coordination, simply that they have different interests. But they're still they're still kind of coordinated. But we can think of another coordination game in the same spirit when actually they have non-symmetric interests. So, for example, that the woman is more like into the sport, while the man is more into the family. So the man cares more about being together, and the woman wants to be together, but she doesn't mind to be alone as long as she goes to her beloved tennis. So in the second non-classical case, then player 1 has two strategies, and the same for player 2. Of course, not all games, by the way, have these two strategies for each player. It's just that we do it in the beginning because these are interesting and simple examples. So football, tennis. So let's say that I went to football, and man enjoys it more because he likes football, and the woman enjoys it because she likes being with the other person. So it's 5-3. Now, if they went to play tennis or watch tennis, then since the man is more into family, despite that he does not like tennis, he's so much interested in being together that in this case he enjoys it almost as he would enjoy if he went to football. So it's going to be, let's say, 4.5, and the woman, of course, has 5. So it's the drop in the enjoyment from not going to what you like while still doing something together is asymmetric. For women, it's a stronger drop because she is more into the sports. Oh, yes. Now, what happens if they don't coordinate? Well, the man, as we said, he is very much into family. So if they don't coordinate, he always gets 0. But the woman is more into sport, or at least also into sport. So if they don't coordinate in this game, the woman still enjoys to go to tennis alone. Not as much as she would enjoy if they were together. It would be 10, not 5, but let's say 2. It's not 0. Well, of course, she would not enjoy going to football together because she doesn't like football to begin with, and she is also alone. So in this case, we have an asymmetric version of this game. Okay, and I think that we are done with examples for now. Yes. So we have seen, or will see, depending on from which group you are, more examples on the tutorial. And now we're going to the next way of modeling games, which is called the extensive.